This is your Irish Diary, presenting the romance and reality of Irish life then and now. Áuric Éireann, or Irish Diary, is presented by the Patrick Butler Family Foundation of St. Paul. Professor John McKiernan of the College of St. Thomas in St. Paul is writer and narrator.
You are looking at one of the oldest associations with mankind, something that goes back into the dim, dim past. It's interesting, isn't it, that something as simple as this, a reed, a piece of reed made of straw, something like this should have such an ancient history in man's experience. This simple thing made of the grasses of the field, this has been varnished for protection. Something like that. It's very much associated with what we shall discuss on this issue of the Irish Diary. This is called Breed's Cross, or St. Bridget's Cross. At the moment, we're less interested in that than in everything associated with it, even the very materials. It's made, as I said, of the grasses of the field, woven at harvest time. But for what reason? And why in the shape of a cross? Well, actually, the last question is more easily answered. It's woven in the shape of a cross because Christianity triumphed over paganism in Ireland, as it did in all of Western Europe, many, many, many centuries ago. But why was it woven at all? Well, we don't know, except in a loose sense we know. Ever since the dawn of time, man has expressed his appreciation for the harvests. And after the harvests, he has celebrated or commemorated or expressed his gratitude in one way or another, and often, of course, by the use of the fruits of the harvest. So that it was nothing new in Ireland or any other country, as a matter of fact, in the world, to take the very grasses of the field, particularly, of course, the cereal grasses, the wheat, the oats, and rye and barley, to take the very cereal grasses, to take their straws and weave them into symbols that in some way or other were connected with man's gratitude for what he had received. Well, when the Christians came along, then what previously had been woven in other shapes was now woven in the shape of a cross, an unusual cross, but a cross nonetheless. So what I should like to concern myself with today and to bring before you is a short introduction, a brief introduction into the Celtic reckoning of time. Now, on the surface, it seems as though time is time. It's the only thing we don't have a lot of, but otherwise, time is time. But it doesn't take very long to think about the subject before one realizes that all the peoples and civilizations of the world have, and still do, express themselves differently with regard to time. In fact, many people think that we Americans are strange in our notions of time because time really seems to throttle us. We seem to be its slaves and so on. But all that aside, even the computation of the calendar has differed amongst different peoples and different civilizations. Now, for our universal convenience today, it simply happens that we're making use of the Gregorian calendar, which itself, you know, was an amendment of the Roman calendar, the Julian calendar. But the Celts were there before the Romans, and they had their own way of reckoning time. And I'm not so much interested in the hours of the day now as in the seasons of the year. And of course, in connection with the seasons of the year, they had certain fixed festivals which came generally at the beginning of these seasons. So if we turn back in history now, Back a couple of thousand years, we find that the Celts divided the year into 4 equal sections. So too do we, but of course we're doing only what has been handed down to us. And I'm not saying the Celts invented it, but it is interesting to see that they had 4 seasons, if we want to use that word, to which they gave the names Imolc, Baltina, Lunasa, and Sauna. Now I'd like to take briefly some of the festivals connected with each of these. The first of them, Imolc, soon came to have a different name. In Christian times, this season, the name of this season was replaced by the name of one of the greatest of the early saints in Ireland, Saint Brigid, or Bride, as her name is pronounced in Irish. So that the first festival, the beginning of the year then, is the time of Bride, Lá Éile Bride, Láil Bride, or the Day of Brigid, which is normally celebrated on the 1st of February. And this is really the beginning of the Irish spring. For us who may still be winter-bound in February, that may come a bit odd. But Ireland is in a milder zone. Her climate is a bit milder. So, Lá Éile Bride, or Láil Bride, the feast of Saint Brigid. Now, this was a very important time. The spring has been important in all civilizations. It's the time of rebirth, resurgence, the time of hope for a new year, a new lease on life, etc. Well then, how did the Irish celebrate it? This cross will be implicated in the celebration, which you'll see in a moment. I have been able to borrow, to show to you several paintings which depict the old Irish customs, some of these customs still alive into our own time. It's very interesting, for instance, before we go to that painting, the first of them, to point out that this particular centuries-old emblem has in our own time, in this century now, come to be the trademark of telefisieren, or the Irish television service. They sign off and they come on with this symbol. So symbols persist. And now, through the courtesy of the copyright owners, the Irish Shell and British Petroleum Company, we'll show you some of the paintings of Maeve Costello which depict some of these customs. I think you'll find them fascinating to behold. Now here, for instance, is the beginning of the year. This is the time of Brigid, Láil Bride now. And if you'll notice, this young man is holding in his right arm what we call a brideog, that is, an effigy, a doll if you want to call it that, an effigy of Bride, of Saint Brigid. It's made of straw, dressed up clothing put about it, and the young men use themselves dress up and go about from house to house singing and celebrating the arrival of Brigid's Day, which commemorated now the rebirth of another season. Sometimes these were made of straw, sometimes of turf, sometimes of bundles of clothes. But these we call the biddy boys. Now in this same kitchen, we'll show you the activities of others as we move over now. And here we see the woman of the house preparing for the festivity. Notice on the floor that strange iron construction. It's tipped. This, of course, is a primitive toaster. And these were still in use in the 20th century, where people use hearth fires, fireplaces. Couldn't think of the word. So then we'll move along in the kitchen to observe some of the other activities, and in particular notice the boy in the background with the mask on his face. Again now, the mask is made of straw, the same as the cross was made of. And you see this young girl in the lower part of the picture. and stretching about herself this straw ring. Now, this is called a crisbridge, or a Brigid's belt, and it's associated with all of these festivities that you see in this busy kitchen. The superstition, if you want to call it that, or the belief was that by throwing this belt around one warded off illnesses. And you see the little child with her bundle of straw, and she is preparing a bed, a straw bed, so that if the saint should be wandering that night, she would have, the door being unlatched, she would have a little warm place by the household fire where she could come in and warm herself for the night. Now, you notice the music which surrounds the whole festivity and gives a general air of gaiety to the whole day. So you see, here was a busy kitchen in which we had the visitor with his brídeog, in which we had the little child occupied, the little older girl, the woman of the house, the banatee, as her name is in Irish, the woman of the house, preparing by her cooking for the festivities of the day. This then is the beginning of the Irish spring. And this cross is generally put over the door or even thrust into the thatch of the house and left there until the following year, as, if you want to call it that, a good luck symbol, or if you want to go a little bit deeper, an imploring of divine help and blessing for the coming year. Now, February 1st, the beginning of the Irish year then, the beginning of spring, Loyal Bride, St. Brigid's Day, this was the day which gave hope. And the old saying, Ní bún sneachta chríomh ó Loyal Bride amach. The Ní bún sneachta, the snow won't remain long on the branches now, since we have St. Brigid's Day. And often it finished at night with a supper of pancakes served on a plate of rushes. By the way, these things, again to talk about ancient methods, these were always woven left to right. You see that left to right? That's the motion of the sun. That's why, of course, our clocks go that way. We have a folklore, even in our very sophisticated lives today, the things that we never question. Why do the clock hands travel from left to right? Because the sun travels that way. And thousands of years ago, we got accustomed to doing things that way. Well, now, that's one period. We go to a period which perhaps is even more interesting from the viewpoint of folklore, and this we call Lá Bealtaine, or May Day. And again, through the courtesy of our artist and the company which owns the paintings, we'll show you some of the beautiful customs associated with that particular day. Lá Bealtaine, May Day. Here the children are dancing around a bush. Now, the bush need not itself be in bloom. Very often it's decked out. Very often it's only a branch thrust into the ground, preferably hawthorn, because hawthorn has magical qualities. And the branch is decorated with candles and with bits of rags tied upon it. And they dance around this because now, Lá Bealtaine, the first day of May, this is the time during which and from which we can expect really beautiful weather. And the cattle are let out to their summer pastures, which would be different from the winter pastures, and the sheep are let out. And here in the farmyard, very interesting and curious customs. Notice the mother. Now, we'll have a lot to say about her. In the first place, she has her baby nearby. Why? Well, May Day is a very powerful time for spirits. And you can remember your Shakespeare plays and possibly other readings. You have heard the word changeling. This is the time, you see, when the fairies would come and take away a human child, You can remember Yeats's poem on this. Take away a human child and leave a changeling, so the mother keeps the baby close by her. Notice also she is by the well. She is sitting by the well, because there are many beliefs in connection with water at this time, that if someone were to come and skim your well, he would take away all the luck, all the profit, all the advantages that you might have had that particular year. The same would be true if you gave away salt or fire or water. You see, if you give away the elementals of nature, then you're likely to be losing something. Notice the donkey is kept inside the fold this night too, because we wish no harm to come to him. And we see this countryside setting. Notice the flowers stuck into the thatch on the farmyard roof there. The flowers themselves, an expression of celebration of the advantages of nature. Generally, the flowers would be cowslips and marigold and so on. And too small for you to see, on the wall, there is a tiny hare, a rabbit we might tend to call him. And he has to be watched pretty carefully, because at this time of the year, if a witch visits you, it would very well be in the form of a hare. Now, this is the time we spoke about changelings. This is the time of the year when, if you happen to flatter a child, you must be very, very careful to say, God bless him. In other words, isn't he healthy? God bless him. Because if you omit that, if you just say, isn't he healthy? Or isn't he brilliant? Or how strong he is? Whatever complimentary remark you might pass about a child, should you neglect to say, God bless him, then you have drawn the attention of the spirit world to this particular child, and having drawn their attention to him and left him defenseless because you didn't say, God bless him, well, you have made it possible for them to make away with him. So this is the time for precautions and safeguards. But it's also the time when certain people return to the earth. And in the lakes of Killarney, for instance, if you got up early on Law Balthana, you might see riding on the surface of the lake this ghostly figure. This is O'Donoghue. O'Donoghue, who rises from the waters on Law Balthana and on a silver-shod steed makes his circuit of the lake. Well, this then is that very magical time, Law Balthana, and it's the second division of the year. Bride, which ushered in spring, Law Balthana, May 1st, that begins summer in Ireland. And then we'll move to the third division, Law Lunasa, which is, correlates with our August 1st. Law Lunasa, the day of the god Lu. Now, Lu was one of the greatest of the Celtic divinities, one of the greatest. And the Celts have left his name all over Europe. For instance, Lyon in France is Lu. It's a city of Lu. Leiden in the Low Countries. Leiden is the Celtic god Lu. There are many places on the continent. Most interesting might be off the continent, London. Again, a city of Lu. And the very word for August, Lunasa, means the month of Lu. So now we come to the season which begins autumn in Ireland. That's August 1st. Lunasa, Law Lunasa. And the associations there, of course, are associations with harvesting. Now notice these figures. They bear a little study. You see the one to your right has just thrown a reaping hook. You can see it flying through the air. And he's thrown it at that last standing stalk of grain. In other words, the grain stalks were bound together and left uncut the cut wheat or the cut barley is behind the first figure. You can see it stacked there. These last have been left uncut, and he throws his reaping hook at it in order to see whether he can cut it. This is the custom of the day. And the standing corn, to use the English and Irish term for grain in general, the standing corn is called the old hag. It's the name given to this, cailleach, you see, which means the old hag. And the superstition of associating a witch and an old hag with a hare arises from these associations, because a grain field is naturally a place to offer refuge to small animals. And very often, when they threw their reaping hooks at these last standing stalks, a hare, which would have hidden in there, would bound away, and therefore, you see, they were chasing away the witch. Well, now we'll move over in this lovely hillside painting and take in the mother and daughter who've come up with a little refreshment for the men working in the field. And can you notice on the woman especially what we call harvest knots? You see them tied to her blouse. And these again are made of the stalks of the grain. And like the cross which I showed you before, made from the elemental materials and associated with these days. Well, La Lunasa then is the time of the harvest, the reaping of the harvest, and the customs associated with it, and the festivities which generally end, of course, in a big dance. Now, not the sort of dance that you and I think of, not in a ballroom, but in somebody's kitchen. In a kitchen, a stone-flagged floor, a kitchen in a house that might be centuries old, and the young men who have been helping and the young women of the neighboring families and so on all come together and have their great dance. Now there's another custom associated with Lunasa, with the god Lu. And that is at this time of the year, at the end of the, or the beginning of the harvesting, I shouldn't say the end, but the beginning of the harvesting, that is the beginning of the Irish fall, August 1st. Around this time, it was customary, and has been customary for centuries, for people to go on what today they might just consider, well, it's a traditional outing. But originally, centuries before Christianity, it was a religious ceremony of a pagan nature. And they'd go up on the mountainsides and go up to high places, and they'd go to riverside streams and so on. And they would associate their festivities with worship of the god. And here you see is Croagh Patrick, which is the place now of an annual pilgrimage at this time of the year in Ireland. Well, now we've covered 3 of the seasons, and we'll move to the last, Lá Samhna. This is November 1st, and it's the beginning of the Irish winter. November, December, and January would be the Irish winter. If you can remember reading Synge's Riders to the Sea, you came across the expression Samhain in there, and that's a reference to this particular month. Well, Lá Samhna, the time of the harvest, the time of the end of the harvest. This is the first day of winter, and although it's not the kind of winter that we know, it is nonetheless a kind of uncomfortable season. So in our painting here, we see the children celebrating in the kitchen, and on that dresser which they stand in front of, you see 4 bowls. Very, very interesting, because these really go back to the dawn of time. It's amazing. In one of those dishes is water, in another a ring, in another plain ordinary earth or clay, and in another ground grain, in other words meal, what the farmers would call meal. And these children, blindfolded, one of them blindfolded, will go over there, and one of them will the one going over will dip her hand in one of the bowls, and if she touches water, well, then she knows that she's doomed to immigration. She must emigrate from the country. If she touches the ring, well, she'll be wedded early. If she touches clay, she'll die young. And if she touches meal, well, she'll come to a fortune. So these customs are very, very old, antedating Christianity any place in the world. Now, in the middle of the room, we see these boys trying to catch an apple. Notice that there are two apples opposite each other. There are two candles opposite each other. And this spins, and obviously he's got to bite the apple without biting the candle, which is lit. Beyond him, you see a young lady who has tossed some nuts into the fire. And the disposition of the fire of these nuts will determine her future fortune, tell the progress of her love. And here the Banatee is mixing a traditional Irish dish called culcannon. It's a mixture of potatoes and chopped up cabbage and chopped up onions and lots of butter, and very, very tasty indeed. Now, this boy before us is doing something that many of us have seen done before in this country. That is, he's ducking for apples. Now, this is the end of the harvest. And after this, one shouldn't attempt to harvest potatoes. One shouldn't attempt to pick any fruits or anything of that sort, because the puka has cast a spell. In fact, he has befouled them. That's all there is to it. Now, those are the great festivities, the seasonal feasts, and we've given you a brief introduction to them. Now, very, very slightly, I'll show you an Easter and a Christmas custom, because these we won't spend as much time. The children have got up early, and they're out in the countryside to see whether the sun is going to dance, because this was a belief that it might possibly dance on Easter morning. And they have brought eggs with them, which are symbolic, of course, of resurrection and life, and they play with these eggs. Well, then the rest of that is familiar to us, egg hunts and so on. But if we move to the Christmas festivities, we find something a little bit different. Again, we notice the boys masked in straw, and these are the wren boys, and they come to the houses now, the farmhouses, and they ask for a treat, and they pretty much want that treat, and if they don't get it, they're not particularly happy. They call themselves the wren boys, and they carry with them in a branch of a tree a dead wren. And that goes back centuries ago, because the belief was that the Danes, who had invaded Ireland at one time and who were being attacked by the Irish, were awakened by a wren and thus incurred the enmity of the Irish. So there they are with the branch of the tree, and with their song, the wren, the king of all birds, St. Stephen's Day was caught in the furs. So we've given you a slight introduction to 6 of the folklore festivals of Ireland.
If you would like a list of selected readings to add to your enjoyment, please send a self-addressed stamped envelope to Professor John McKiernan, College of St. Thomas, St. Paul, Minnesota. This program has been presented as a public service by the Patrick Butler Family Foundation and produced at KTCA-TV, Minneapolis, St. Paul.